Today we've got an amazing show for you. You know, a parent's worst nightmare will be to have the police at your door early in the morning and you wonder what's going on. It's a story of tragedy, but amazingly God turns this around. And it's a story that God does great things and even some humor thrown in. The day was supposed to mark the beginning of Kevin's adult life, but it ended up being a tragedy. And today I want you to meet Barry, his father, who has saved thousands of lives by warning the public about the dangers of even one time doing binge drinking.
Barry Adkins lives with his wife Beverly in Arizona. After the devastating loss of his 18-year-old son, Kevin, to one night of binge drinking, Barry has made it his life's goal to make something good come out of it, to educate, communicate, and inspire about the dangers of binge drinking. His compelling, down-to-earth father's approach touches parents and teens alike. In an effort to raise awareness of the dangers of alcohol abuse, Barry walked with his son's ashes in a backpack from Arizona to Montana, sharing their story. Please welcome father, author, hero, Barry Adkins, as he joins me to talk about Kevin's last walk.
Barry, welcome, Barry. So good to have you.
Thanks for having me on, Leon.
So that's quite an opening line. It was the first night of Kevin's adult life.
Yeah, he had actually talked about, a few weeks before that, he had actually talked about how he couldn't believe his life was finally beginning. He was going to move out on his own.
Tell me a little bit about this, because this has become, from this horrible incident, most parents would call it that, you've done some amazing things, but I'd like to focus on the story a little bit about Kevin. Let's talk about him for a minute, and go for it.
So he had never been in any trouble in school or with the law. The extent of his involvement with the law was a speeding ticket he got when he was 16 years old.
So he took after his mom.
Yeah, exactly. Dad had a little more trouble with that stuff. Okay. But, you know, in high school, his high school principal didn't even know who he was. His senior year in high school, he wasn't a very good student. He was actually flunking his English class in March of his senior year, and he needed that for graduation. And to say we talked a lot about English that spring is not a fair description. I would call and talk to the teacher, and back then it was a little more open. The teacher knew what to do to motivate Kevin, so she would go back into class and tell him in front of the other students that Daddy had called to check on him.
Oh, that would embarrass him most.
But it did the trick,
really?
Right?
Okay.
He graduated from high school, and I'll never forget going to his high school graduation. He gave me a hug and said, "Thanks for not giving up on me, Dad."
Wow.
So
it worked.
Yeah, it did.
So in the book, because you wrote this book, Kevin's Last Walk, was he going off to university, or what was the event, the party that brought his death about?
He wasn't going off to university. He had gotten a job. So after he graduated from high school, he got a job that was making decent money. I had actually just co-signed a loan so he could buy a new truck just a few weeks before that. And in hindsight, a very interesting conversation. When I went in to sign the papers, I sat down with the financial guy, which I never liked going in to do all of that stuff. And the guy says, "How about some life insurance?" And I said, "I don't need any life insurance. My wife will do just fine if something happens to me." And he said, "I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about your son." And I rather indignantly told him that 18-year-old boys don't die. They don't need life insurance.
Really?
But I was wrong, they do.
And he was talking about the loan on that truck.
Yeah,
and if Kevin was to die, it would be all paid off.
All paid off.
So he didn't get the insurance?
No, and he never lived long enough to make a single payment on that truck. A few weeks later, he started the process of moving out on his own. And basically what happened was he came home. He had been out with his friends that day, came home. We helped him throw a few things in his new truck. He came back in the house, and I'm sure none of your kids are like this, but in Kevin's room, he had a pile of clean, wrinkled clothes next to a pile of dirty clothes. He never folded anything. So he threw some jeans in the dryer and de-wrinkled them. And then he came back in and he said that he wasn't going to take his toothbrush with him, that he'd be back tomorrow and get it. He brushed his teeth, put on his jeans. I walked out front with him like I normally do and watched him drive away. It was the last time I saw him alive.
That was the last time you saw him alive?
Yep.
Tell me about that night. What happened?
So his friends decided to throw a housewarming party for him. He was moving in with 3 other guys, and, you know, they threw a housewarming party for him. There was probably 15 to 25 kids at this party, ages ranging from 14 to 28. They started with beer. Sometime around midnight, they started doing shots. He started doing shots. He did 6 or 7 double shots of either Jack Daniels or Jägermeister. He passed out a short time later. They put him in his bed on his side in case he vomited. They actually came in and shaved his head and his legs while he was passed out.
Playing a joke on him.
Yeah.
Just
It was I have a voicemail from that night, and if you listen to it, you'd think, they're just having a good time, right?
Yeah.
But one of his friends was worried about him, and he kept going back in to check on him. And around 4 a.m., he came in and found him blue. And first calls to 911 indicated difficulty breathing. The next calls were not breathing. He died alone in the hospital while I slept peacefully in my bed.
So why did he die? I mean, it wasn't choking because they had
No.
him on the side. So they did the best they could as teenage boys to look after him.
Right.
Was it alcohol poisoning? Or
It was alcohol poisoning.
So what does alcohol poisoning do? Like it shuts down his respiration?
Shuts
system?
down everything.
Everything just
And-
shut. They
and-
couldn't revive. They couldn't turn that around.
No.
He
was
made
too
the
late.
hospital alive.
Well, they pronounced him dead at the hospital. There may have been some sign of life, but
But he was breathing at home. Then he called the ambulance. Is that what happened? The ambulance?
they found him blue, so he was not breathing. They tried
Okay.
to do CPR on him at that point, and then he was pronounced dead at the hospital. And you know, once they get to the point where the alcohol is in their system, and that's what I try to tell kids all the time, is you don't know what you can tolerate. The coroner actually said that they have seen as low as 0.24% kill teenagers.
Whoa, say that again. 0.24%
Yeah.
has killed teenagers. Well, a ton of people below that all the time, don't they?
Yeah.
So some people, you never know.
You don't know what it'll take. And that's the thing. When somebody's passed out, the solution is not to lay them on their side in case they vomit. It's to get them to the hospital.
Okay, you're saying some one-liners that are powerful. So when someone passes out at a party, the goal is not to put them to bed and put them on their side. That is so dangerous already, they should be at the hospital.
They should. I actually told this story to a high school in Phoenix, spoke to the whole school, and a couple weeks later I got an email from a counselor there. There had been a party from students from that school and another school, and one of the students passed out. Luckily, kids do listen. He heard the story. One of the guys was friends with the guy that was passed out, and he wanted to call 911. They're like, no, we're all going to get in trouble. So he put his friend in the car and drove him to an urgent care facility. They called 911. They air-evac'd him out and saved his life. So,
Wow. This story can go in so many directions. First thing I want to talk about is, did Kevin have an alcohol problem previous to that?
not that I know of. There was a couple times when I thought that he had been out drinking, and he knew where I stood on that. I mean,
Yeah.
his grandfather was an alcoholic. He saw what that did to him. Never really had any, as I said, I never really had any problems with him.
Right. So in your mind, this is not an issue. But a lot of teenagers, when you get out on your own, it's almost like the rites of passage or becoming a man. I was in a restaurant the other day with Sally, and it just strikes me listening to you talk, and we were watching this family. It had a little girl, about an 18-year-old boy, and parents. And it was his birthday that day, 18. And so they ordered him, and it was a big thing going on in this restaurant. He's 18, it's his first drink, and they're ordering alcohol. And I'm thinking to myself, since when does a rite of passage mean you can go start buying your own alcohol? Is it that important to us?
Sadly, it's a society thing. It doesn't
is.
have to be that way. And I think the problem is people don't understand the pros and cons of that kind of thing. I mean, when I speak to students, I talk about what are the good things that can happen when you go out binge drinking, and what are the bad things that can happen. And as you can imagine, the list goes on of
Is
bad
the list
things.
pretty big about all the good things that can happen?
There rarely is anything. That's exactly the point. Is they might say, well, I forget about my problems, or I was depressed. That's my favorite one. I was depressed, and that's why I want to go out binge drinking. But the bad things that can happen: the sexual assault, DUI. You can kill someone. You could be killed. You could be assaulted. I mean, you know, I don't really watch Cops, but there's a reason why when you watch that show, what's the first question they ask when they walk up to somebody? You been drinking tonight?
It's true, every time.
Every time, that's the first question they ask, because they know people do stupid stuff when they're drunk.
You know, universities, high schools, like drinking, partying, binge drinking, it's just so prevalent everywhere. The World Health Organization says it is a world problem, alcoholism. And I think teenagers just think they're safe. They're going to live forever. Would you agree? Like teenagers just thinking nothing bad's going to ever happen to me.
That's the way Kevin was. He thought he was 10 feet tall and bulletproof. You know, he never believed anything could happen to him. And I think for me is trying to educate them about what can happen and help them to understand that you don't have anything to prove to anyone by going out and proving that you can do 20 beers in a night. I mean, in 20 years, nobody's going to remember that anyway. And you know, that's really what it comes down to.
Sounds funny, but it's so true.
It's so true, right? You think you have all these things you have to prove and to fit in, and you don't have anything to prove to anybody.
You know, the Bible says the fear of man is a snare. If we're worried about what people are thinking and we're trying to impress people, it just creates snares in our life. You know, I want to take a break, and when we come back, I would love to hear some of the things you teach, because you travel and speak to schools and young people about this. And like you said, you've saved a lot of lives. So I want to go through some of that stuff.
Okay.
When we come back. We'll be right back.
But the two most important decisions that a child will ever make are about drugs and alcohol.
Dealing with the devil, breaking bad habits, and strengthening your faith are all lessons that Pastor Leon teaches on in the series Battles and Storms. The 40 messages included in this USB series will encourage you through all the battles that come.
Have you ever had somebody attack you with words, attack your family, your business, your character, and attack you, and it just never stops and it never lets up? You think, oh, what did I do wrong? So many people, when they get weary, think they're out of God's will. Weariness is to make you believe you're out of God's will. Weariness is to make you believe you've got to get out. You've got to change something. You've got to back away. Weariness is designed to make you lose your passion because you're in the middle of God's will.
To purchase this series, go to leonfontaine.com.
We're back with Barry. Now, Barry, we just talked, we shared with the audience the story of Kevin and how he passed away. Before we get into some of the, give me a couple thoughts about you and your wife handling this. I mean, how did you get through that? Because he died alone, you said.
Yeah.
In a bed while you were at home sleeping.
Yeah.
Just the fact you said that means it must have really bothered you.
Of course it did. You know, and honestly, when a couple loses a child, the marriage will quite often go one of two ways. It will either destroy your relationship or it'll bring you closer. In my case, it has brought us closer because we understand that we need each other.
I've heard as high as 85%.
Yeah.
Is that true?
I don't doubt that for a second because there's a lot of blame.
Yeah.
There's a lot of anger.
So is there anything you and your wife did might have been as simple as could be that helped you come together so that together you could deal with this tragedy?
Well, actually, there was a few things. Honestly, the first one is about forgiveness. It was easy for me to forgive those that were at the party, and Kevin was my son. I can forgive him for what happened. But forgiving myself for letting this happen was much harder. But you have to forgive everybody.
How did you blame yourself for letting him? Like, how did your mind condemn you? You should have done what? If.
There's 1,000 things. As a
Okay.
parent, you play that over and over and over in your mind, and you're absolutely sure there was something you could have done differently to prevent this from happening. You could have told him, wait one more night.
Yeah.
You could have had another conversation with him about binge drinking. There's just, the story goes on in your mind. You play it over and over and over in your mind.
So was it the next morning the police knocked on your door?
Yeah, the next morning, it was a Sunday morning, 8:30 in the morning. We're sitting around drinking coffee, talking about what we're going to do that day. And there's a knock on the door, and we look at each other like, who's coming to see us? And I opened the door, and there were 2 police officers there and someone in plain clothes. And it never clicked that this might be something bad. I thought it had to do with a neighbor or a dog or something like that. And I invited them in. I was joking with them, and one of the officers walked in and stood in front of the same chair that Kevin had sat in a few weeks before and talked about how his life was beginning. And he said there'd been an accident and your son was dead. And I thought they were talking about maybe one of Bev's sons from a previous marriage. And she asked who, and they said it was Kevin. And as the saying goes, my life changed forever. And then they handed us his driver's license. And for me, when they hand you your child's driver's license, that's when you realize this is real. This isn't a mistake. They're not talking about a kid down the street or next door or 3 streets down or the next city or another Kevin Adkins that lives someplace else. It's your son and he's not coming back.
They left.
Yeah.
You and your wife are in the house. Are there any other siblings or children you have with you?
Nobody else was living at home at the time. So I had to obviously make some phone calls, and then I went over to my daughter's house. She had a young child that Kevin had helped watch. It was his nephew, who will have no memory of Kevin whatsoever. I had a friend drive me there because obviously I didn't think I could, and I remember going in there, and she was excited because I didn't tell her I was coming over. She was excited to see me and Bev and the friend show up, and she's all excited, and Bev grabs my grandson and goes in the bedroom, and I started crying, and I put my hands on her shoulder and told her that Kevin was in heaven. That was by far the most difficult thing I had to do.
It's amazing the beer commercials and the alcohol commercials don't show those moments, which happen by the thousands, don't they?
They do.
Across the country.
And as a society, we do a lousy job of discouraging it because there are all kinds of commercials. Hollywood makes movies, Spring Break, The Hangover.
It's all good.
It's all good. There's really no problem with it. They don't spend much time. There really isn't an equal distribution of the time talking about the good things that can happen and the bad things that can happen.
Talk me through what you say when you get before an audience of young people like Kevin who, they're just excited about life and their future, and you're just an old fuddy-duddy telling me I can't drink.
I am an old fuddy-duddy, that is right.
All these teenagers.
A bald old fuddy-duddy.
What would you tell them? Where do you start just to get their attention? Do you tell the story?
I just tell the story. I don't put any statistics up. I put a picture of Kevin up, and I talk about what happened that night. And I've told a story in front of 1,000 kids, and you can hear a pin drop because it's a very personal story. I talk about that night and what happened and how it wasn't a happily ever after story. And I think kids appreciate a personal story as opposed to being bombarded with those statistics because anybody can get up there and throw those up.
That's very true. I think they tell us that stories are the way you get people's attention. In fact, the best public speakers on the planet, Jesus, knew how to tell a story.
You tell a story.
And that story had learning moments and points in it.
Exactly.
What are some of those learning moments? What are some of those points you feel the story shares with the kids?
Well, the main point is that, you know, there's decision making that you have to make as a student. And you're going to decide where to go to school, you know, who you're going to marry, you're going to drive a Ferrari, you know, Maserati. What do you want to do when you grow up? But the two most important decisions that a child will ever make are about drugs and alcohol. And you make one bad decision about that, and all those hopes and dreams
The
are
two
gone.
most important decisions a young person's ever going to make is about alcohol and drugs.
I believe that. And I'm happy to debate that with anybody that wants to, because it just, to me,
You'd win.
yeah, it to me, you just don't understand how important that is, and that's what I tell parents too, is you need to educate your children as if their lives depend upon it, because it does.
What advice would you give parents with teenagers?
It's always tough to start that conversation, right? You're always uncomfortable about talking to your kids about drugs and alcohol, and the kids are rolling their eyes and stuff, but one of the things, a couple things, kids tend to want to listen, but not necessarily when you're talking to them. Those of us that have young kids, it just happened to me recently, and I think it's a great example. We were going to go on family vacation. I had my two grandchildren in the back. I'm talking to my wife about going on vacation. We're talking about cabins and vacations and stuff. We're not talking to the kids in the back, but guess what? Wait. What did you say there about cabins? We're going somewhere and we're going on vacation? So you can have that conversation with a spouse and not talk to them, but if they're in the room, I guarantee you they're going to listen to it. You know, I've had several people tell me that just buying the book and putting it on the counter, kids are curious. It isn't that you necessarily have to talk to them about it, but if you're talking about it, and there's examples in the news every day. You don't have to create anything. There's examples in the news every day about poor decision making that cost people their lives. You know, the gal that was raped when the boys were drunk, and that's happened several times where things have happened like that. You can use those news stories and just talk to your spouse about it while they're sitting there, and they'll be listening.
Where do you stand on the subject of alcohol, period?
Well, we can't go back to the days of Prohibition.
No.
I don't believe that for a second.
No.
I believe that in moderation it is fine, but I think you should wait until you're 21. The drinking age in the U.S. is 21, and it's that age for a reason, because you make poor decisions when you're younger. And I believe that, well, the statistics tell us that the younger you start drinking, the more likely you are to become an alcoholic.
The younger you start drinking, the more likely you are to be an alcoholic.
And most illegal drugs are tried for the first time under the influence of alcohol.
Say that most drugs are tried when you're already drinking.
Yes.
So you don't go try drugs when you're in your right mind.
Right.
Alcohol anesthetizes you a little bit.
Yep.
And yeah, give me that,
Yeah, I'll try that.
and I'll try that.
Yep.
And so it introduces them to drugs, and then it's a slippery slope.
It's a very slippery slope from there.
Now, when you're talking to teenagers, when you get done telling the story, do you do Q&A?
I sure do.
All right. What are some of the questions they have for you?
They'll ask me if I drink, and
It's
the
the
answer
first
to that is,
question.
imagine that, right? And I say I do,
Yeah.
because I do. But I'll have one drink.
Yeah.
Because the thing that I try to make sure they understand is that when you start drinking and you drank a 12-pack of beer, are you in control, or is that 12-pack of beer in control?
Right.
You lose control, and you make stupid decisions, and look at it as a control thing. Do you want me to control you? Do you want that 12-pack of beer to control you? Or do you want to be in control of your life? Most people want to be in control of their life. They don't want something else controlling them.
That's very true. What are some of the other questions? What are the most common questions you get asked? Do you drink was one.
You know, typically they actually want to talk about the walk, which I guess we haven't talked about yet. When I tell the story, so to back up, after he died, I had to make a decision about what to do with his ashes. And I still remember going to the funeral home to pick those up. As a parent, you'll be able to relate to this. I walk in, they're very polite. They take me into this very nice office, set me down in front of a nice desk, and they walk in and they put my son's ashes
Just
on
like
the
that.
table in front of me. And at that point, that was the low point for me. But at that point, I understood that I didn't want to be a victim, that I knew that I had to try to make something good come from this tragedy. And so that's why I decided to walk from Arizona to Montana with his ashes.
See, I want to do another program on that because we're going to come back after this show, and I'd like to talk through that.
Okay.
And walk through that because that is a big part of the book. And I love the fact, our time is pretty much up, but I love the fact that you made a decision. I'm not going to be a victim. It's what I heard you say.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of people that when they lose a child, their life is just basically over. They seem to live in that hurt.
Yeah.
They live in that moment and they're locked away. And you made a decision to go on and do something great with your life.
Yeah.
Thank you for being with us today. This is
bet.
awesome. We'll be right back.
Have you read this week's newspaper column by Leon Fontaine? Each week, Leon's columns appear in both the Winnipeg Sun and the Calgary Sun. Leon believes that God has designed all of us to be leaders in our sphere of influence and that wisdom and knowledge are essential to reach your full destiny. In these articles, Leon shares crucial leadership lessons, how to deal with people, and how to build relationships that take you to the next level. Growing leaders is one of Leon's greatest passions. You can read both editions today by visiting leonfontaine.com.
It was a pleasure having you with us today, Barry. Thank you. You know, we're talking today about a tragedy. It's something none of us would ever want on our worst enemy, to lose a child. And I love what Barry had to say when he said that I made a decision not to be a victim. And he went on from there. But prevention's a big issue. He was talking about how do we tell our kids, because their eyes glaze over when you start just preaching at them. But I like what he said, have conversations. The news is filled with drunk driving, things that take place at parties that destroy, rapes, etc. And they probably could be good conversations, just asking for their opinion, debating it around the table. As a dad with 5 kids who are all grown up today, we did that a lot. It wasn't so much that I preached at them, as it was we talked about it. And as we talked about it, they had opinions, I had opinions, but it brought the topic onto the table. Don't ignore your kids. Don't not deal with it. Don't be uncomfortable and think, well, I think they go to church, they went to Sunday school, it was a church's job, it was a Christian school's job. No, take on the tough conversations as a parent. Respect them, love them, speak about real things, and I think it'll help you